in these circumstances.
Boris Johnson is continuing to stand by his advisor and has rejected criticism from the public and within his own party that the episode shows the rules don't apply to those in charge. Mr Johnson maintains no one in his team has undermined the government's message. However, the BBC's Rob Watson says the whole saga is very damaging for Boris Johnson.
It's immensely serious because, it's perfectly possible that he has a profound public relations problem. In other words, you get lots of people in the UK who think, hang on a minute, there's one rule for the people that live in Downing Street and one rule for the people who live in every other street in the UK. So that would undermine trust, that would undermine the authority of the government as it sort of moves forward out of the lockdown. I think potentially he has another big crisis more internally, and that is, an awful lot of Conservative MPs have been very unhappy about the handling of this particular crisis, but actually they've been a little bit restive ever since the whole start of the pandemic crisis, and a lot of them have been thinking, well, Boris Johnson is an absolutely fantastic campaigner in elections and referenda, but is he really much good at governance?
The BBC's Rob Watson there. The death toll in the UK is closing in on 37,000, the second highest in the world. Testing of the drug President Trump touted as a game changer has been halted. Trials on the effectiveness of hydroxychloroquine were underway in a number of countries, but the World Health Organization says they've now been suspended as a precaution. A recent study has suggested more patients treated with the drug had died than those who had not taken it. Japan has lifted the state of emergency imposed on Tokyo and the surrounding area, which was put in place because of a spike in infections. Despite its densely packed cities and having the world's oldest population, Japan has managed to keep COVID-19 deaths to under 1,000, far fewer than most countries its size. From Tokyo, here's the BBC's Rupert Wingfield-Hayes.
In early April, it looked like Tokyo was on the brink of a huge surge in COVID-19 cases. Reluctantly, Prime Minister Shinzo Abe ordered a state of emergency. But the surge never came. Cases grew, but nothing like Europe and America. And now, 7 weeks later, Mr Abe has declared victory.
We have our own specific measures here in Japan. We were able to control the spread of the virus in our own way in just a month and a half. I think we were able to show the strength of the Japan model.
Opinion here is deeply divided on why Japan has done so well. Few think it has much to do with Mr Abe. His popularity has continued to fall throughout the crisis. There was no real lockdown, and even now testing lags far behind other countries. And yet there is no denying Japan's success. Just 850 deaths in a country of 125 million. Everyone has a pet theory. Mask wearing is common here. Japanese bow instead of shaking hands. And now, from the United States, evidence that obesity dramatically increases the risk of dying from COVID-19. Japan has, by some distance, the lowest rate of obesity in the developed world.
Rupert Wingfield-Hayes with that report. The coronavirus pandemic has had disastrous effects on many businesses, but few more so than those in the airline industry. Demand for flights has all but dried up, putting many companies at risk of collapse. Germany is stumping up around $16 billion to bail out Lufthansa, one of the world's largest airlines. As part of the deal, the government gets a temporary 20% stake in the airline, which can be increased. CNN's Fred Pleitgen has more.
One of the things that we're seeing shine through here, and I've been following the negotiations about this very, very closely, is on the one hand, the German government obviously wants to make sure that the company will operate in a way that it would like to see it operate, which means not paying too much in the way of dividends, which means operating in a way that's environmentally friendly in the future. But you can also very much see Carsten Spohr, who is, of course, the CEO of the Lufthansa Group, and you can see his apprehension towards any sort of government influence in the day-to-day operation. That there are going to be two representatives from the German government who are going to be sitting on the supervisory board, but those are not going to be government officials. Those are going to be independent experts, as they call them, which I think is sort of a concession that the airline has won that says, look, there is going to be this restructuring. This restructuring is going to cost a lot of money. And of course, the airline isn't going to be making very much money in the next couple of years. but they want to also give management, which means Carsten Spohr at this point in time, enough leeway to do that the way that he sees fit.
CNN's Fred Pleitgen there. Staying in Germany, and the country's highest court has ruled Volkswagen owes money to people who want refunds for cars with rigged emission systems. It's the latest setback for the company from its 2015 Dieselgate scandal. Our correspondent Ira Spitzer has more from Berlin.
Germany's Federal Court of Justice ruled against the country's largest car maker, setting a precedent that people here who purchased the manipulated vehicles are very likely to have a right to return them and receive a partial refund, taking into account the miles already driven. There are about 60,000 lawsuits still pending against VW in German courts, and the scandal has already cost the company more than $25 billion, mostly in the United States.
Ira Spitzer with that report. Well, one place on Earth where there's no COVID-19 is Macquarie Island. Macquarie Island is between Tasmania and Antarctica, and there are around 20 people there at the moment. Tasmania's Department of Primary Industries has been monitoring species on the island since 1994. Earlier I spoke to wildlife ranger Sarah Larkham, who says they're seeing good signs about the wandering albatross, whose numbers had been in decline. She told me a bit more about the wildlife she monitors on the sub-Antarctic island.
Macquarie is home to a species of penguin called the royal penguin, which is endemic. It's only found here on Macquarie. And the royals have a few really massive, really substantial colonies where they all come on land in one spot to breed over summer. One of these is down on the southern tip of the island at Herd Point, where I think the estimates are 800,000 pairs of royal penguins in one place. So in summer, it's just a cacophony of penguins absolutely everywhere, crammed onto this little rocky spit of land. And a fair bit of media going on in the past couple of days, more focused on the wandering albatross, which are one of the key species we monitor down here. So the wanderers are the largest of all seabirds, the largest flying bird, basically. They have a wingspan of up to 3.5 meters. So they're absolutely colossal birds when you get to see them up close. Over the past decade, they've been really, really low in number out here. Each season we've had maybe only 3 or 4 nests with chicks being produced. This year we had 10 nests built over summer, so over December, January. And at the moment, we have 6 of those nests with chicks in them, which is quite a high number for the really small colony down here. So yeah, we're all quite excited to track those chicks through the season.
And what's it like for you and the people that you're there working with? What's it like for you living there?
Of course, it's pretty isolated, being so distant from the rest of the world. But we have really good comms, so we have decent internet and phone connections back to friends and family on the mainland. And we have a nice community here. We have weekly events where we'll have a special occasion and get dressed up for dinner and that kind of thing. Yeah, so it's good to have a little community of people.
That was Sarah Larkham, a wildlife ranger for the Tasmanian Parks and Wildlife Service based on Macquarie Island. And that's World Watch for today. Back to you, Marnie.
Thanks, Annabelle, and that's Midday Report Te Purongo o Te Potutanga for Tuesday, May the 26th. We'll bring you the latest COVID-19 briefing with the Director General of Health shortly after 1. Stay with us for that. Midday Report will be back tomorrow with interviews and the latest news from Aotearoa and the world. But for now, kia pai tōra, coming up to the news at 1.
RNZ News at 1 o'clock. Good afternoon, I'm Paul Brennan. The government has announced almost $40 million of funding to ensure New Zealand has sufficient supply of a COVID-19 vaccine as soon as possible. $10 million from the COVID-19 vaccine strategy will be spent on research in this country, and a further $5 million has been set aside for future production. More than $20 million has been earmarked for international research and to assist organisations which will eventually distribute the vaccine to developing countries. The government says it will also advocate internationally for the equitable distribution of a future vaccine, with a particular focus on the Pacific. A moderate earthquake has struck near Levin this afternoon, centred in the same place as the quake yesterday morning. The 5.2 magnitude quake was centred 20 kilometres northwest of Levin. It was widely felt around the lower North Island and at the top of the South Island. A pair jailed for life after torturing and murdering a teenager in South Auckland have been called cruel and depraved. Toko Shane Winter, also known as Ashley Winter, and Kerry Te Amo were today jailed for life after being found guilty of murder at the High Court in Auckland last year. The pair kidnapped, tortured and hanged 17-year-old Demetrius Paidama, whose body was found in a drum at a derelict house in Mangere in July 2018. Justice Brewer said during sentencing there was a high degree of cruelty, depravity and callous.
Kia ora koutou katoa, talofa lava. Welcome to today's briefing, and thank you very much to those of you who have made the trip here to a new venue. Some familiar faces from recent weeks and some familiar faces from perhaps a month or two back, but nice to see you all here today. Once again, there are no new cases of COVID-19 to report in New Zealand. Our total number of confirmed cases therefore remains at 1,154, and we will continue to report that number to the World Health Organization, and our combined total of confirmed and probable cases is 1,504. Our total number of recovered cases is now 1,461, and we have only 22 active cases still in New Zealand. There are no additional deaths to report, and there is just one person still in hospital, and that person does not require intensive care treatment. Yesterday, our labs processed 1,841 tests. We usually see a lower number on Sunday and Monday, and so that's what's coming through there. And to date, the grand total is 263,156. A word or two on the New Zealand COVID Tracer app. So the app has now recorded 405,000 registrations, an increase of 25,000 since this time yesterday, so the numbers continue to increase daily, and I'll continue to encourage as many Kiwis as possible to download the app, even if the functionality at this point is still relatively limited. Just by registering, it means that we have securely held your updated contact details in case we need to contact you only for the purposes of tracing if you are potentially or have been exposed to a case. There are now 15,500 QR posters that have been downloaded and displayed by businesses, and that represents about a quarter of what we call active businesses, that is the ones that people are likely to be visiting, like retails, settings or hospitality venues. We're continuing to make good progress under Alert Level 2, and today's case number of 0 again confirms that. Our case numbers are low. Obviously, our recovery rate is now high, and we have only one person still requiring hospital level care. So the hard work put in by New Zealanders to this point means that yesterday the government was able to announce that extension of the maximum group number size from 10 up to 100, taking effect from midday on Friday this week. So as of then, or from then, many of the activities that people have been looking forward to enjoying in larger groups, such as church and faith-based gatherings, as well as family events and weddings, will be able to take place. So with the exception of larger, more significant events like large sporting fixtures and concerts and the like, it means that most normal or everyday activities are now possible in some form under Alert Level 2. Some people are asking how quickly we might move to Alert Level 1 and whether we should be aiming to get there sooner than the 4-week period signalled by the Prime Minister yesterday. I think it's important to keep in perspective that New Zealand is already moving through the alert levels and relaxing its restrictions more quickly than other countries, including our nearest neighbour, Australia. We're acutely aware that under the Alert Level 2 restrictions, there are still constraints on some businesses and on everybody's daily lives, and we want to be careful to get the balance right. We are working hard already to lay out the detail of what Alert Level 1 might look like so that we can move there as soon as it is safe to do so. Moving on to vaccines. I understand a ministerial announcement is being made presently on New Zealand's COVID-19 vaccine strategy, and the Ministry of Health played a role in developing this up. It aims to secure a vaccine that is safe and effective for New Zealanders at the earliest possible time. Obviously, the development of such a vaccine will be a key tool, not just in our efforts to control COVID-19, but in global efforts. The strategy is designed to ensure that New Zealand contributes to both the research and discovery of a vaccine and its development, but also testing and then the supply. All these elements are covered in the strategy. It enables our scientists to contribute to and be linked into global research efforts and will ensure that we are active participants in all the process of developing a vaccine, including opportunities for onshore production should those be required. More information on the vaccine strategy will be available on the MB website. Just an update on quarantine and managed isolation. You may have heard mentioned yesterday that we welcomed our 10,000th person into managed isolation or quarantine in Auckland. So far, around 8,000 New Zealanders and others have completed their stay in Auckland and Christchurch and have returned to their homes here in New Zealand. Their commitment to managed isolation is a commitment that we will continue to support and that will support the health and safety of all New Zealanders as part of our overall COVID-19 approach. Let's be clear here. The border is our riskiest area, and it is a critical part of the government's overall elimination strategy, and this is especially now that we feel confident we have broken the chain of domestic transmission. We do not want to put the good progress we've made in jeopardy, and we know that international arrivals are essentially the potential source of new infections in Aotearoa. However, we have also been very mindful of the advice from a recent High Court ruling and the need to consider all requests for an exemption from that process of quarantine or managed self-isolation, to consider those all very carefully. And we do this with great care and as quickly as possible. A number of exemptions have now been granted, and every exemption is looked at on its merits. However, every exemption to that very tight border process does create risk, and they are therefore only granted in exceptional circumstances. I'm happy to take questions.
How important is a successful vaccine to New Zealand's COVID-19 response?
Well, it's successful for our response and for the global response. Clearly, this is a virus that is having a big impact globally. We have managed to head off at having a significant impact here in New Zealand. We only need to look at countries like, or jurisdictions like the UK, and I made a comparison in an interview this morning. If we were the UK, we would have had between 3,000 and 3,500 deaths to date. Yesterday, we would have reported 250 cases, new cases, and we would still be in lockdown. That's proportionate by population. So a vaccine and or effective treatments are critical in both our efforts and global efforts, not just to control COVID-19, but to be able to open up, particularly open up our borders.
How long do you think it will take to develop a vaccine?
Well, I'm guided by the best estimates of scientists who know this area, and even the 12 to 18 month period that is generally quoted would be exceedingly rapid amount of time to get a vaccine safely developed and manufactured, and then of course available for administration to the population.
What would you say to the two questions? So, what would you say to the reports that there have been circulated about a vaccine by September? Then my other question is around sport, community sports. When do you think we might be able to see people in the stands if they're distant?
So, yes, I have heard reports, or a report of a vaccine available by September. I'm sure we will be, we would welcome a vaccine if it was available by September. I just don't think that presents enough time to safely develop, test, and then manufacture a vaccine. All the best estimates are that it's going to be longer than that. And with the group size going to 100, yes, community sport will be available, but those larger sporting events with more than 100 people attending, as with any other event, will be once we move into Alert Level 1. Recalling that the Prime Minister did say yesterday that on the 8th of June, Cabinet would once again review the Alert Level 2 settings, and look at the data and look at the number of cases and what was happening at the border, just to check that all the settings look right and whether there was any opportunity, in fact, to further ease.
Which vaccine
If you're at a local rugby game, can you go and watch but socially distance if it's just like you say you're standing around the field, or is it just games without spectators?
Oh, well, as long as the group size at any event is no more than 100, and likewise we would be asking and expecting organisers to make sure that they knew who was at the game. So if you've got a game between two teams, they will obviously know who is there, who is playing, but also they should be keeping a record of, and people should be keeping their own record of attending these sorts of events.
Scientists have been asking for this kind of support from the government in terms of the vaccine for weeks, if not months. Has it come too late?
Well, there's actually been support made available prior to the announcements that are being made today, and the money that's being announced today, both for our onshore efforts and to support global efforts, I think is a significant contribution, and it will support both basic research here, but also create the opportunity to look at how we might scale up actual production of a vaccine if required.
And to follow up on that, when a vaccine is available and is able to be distributed within New Zealand, has the Ministry of Health started looking at that stage 4 process of vaccine development, which is surveillance within New Zealand? Is there a plan for that?
Surveillance of, do you mean...
So, like monitoring the vaccine and people?
Well, there is a number of stages of vaccine testing, a number of phases, and yes, New Zealand, this is part of the vaccine strategy, is New Zealand will be able to contribute to global efforts at each of the phases, if it looks like a useful setting to do it in. And I think there will be some interest in New Zealand because we've had such low rates of infection here. So we won't have a level of possible immunity from people who have previously been infected. So yes, New Zealand will be interested in participating in all aspects of vaccine development.
Which vaccine
Yeah.
There's $5 million in the package for potentially manufacturing a vaccine in New Zealand. What sort of stars need to align for us to be able to manufacture a vaccine that may have been originally developed elsewhere within New Zealand?
Well, if we were to manufacture here in New Zealand, obviously we would need to have the sort of technical and production capability to do that. But it would be done under a licensing arrangement and would require sort of the core components of the vaccine to be provided from offshore that we would then be able to combine and put into the doses required here. So it will require a high degree of international collaboration, which is exactly what's been signalled in the vaccine strategy.
Which vaccine currently under development do you hold the most hope for?
I don't have a preference. I understand there are upwards of 100 vaccines currently in development, and those fall into a range of categories depending on the type of technology used. And I think what our vaccine strategy lays out is that we haven't got all our irons in one fire. We've actually got them spread, and that we will be supporting not just efforts to create a vaccine for New Zealand, but also supporting equitable access to a vaccine, particularly for our Pacific neighbours.
What's the realistic time frame for a vaccine? You said 12 to 18 months is optimistic, so what should the public expect?
Well, 12 to 18 months. I think that's what everyone's looking at now, but we're all watching with interest. And, I mean, what is also clear, and this has been said by a number of global leaders, is there is huge resource and focus going on to this. And we've seen in crises before how if you combine, and particularly if countries combine both technology and brainpower, you can make rapid advances. So we would all hope that it was within 12 to 18 months. If it's sooner, that would be, I would think, a bonus. But we should not expect anything before 12 to 18 months.
On the border, should we be looking at toughening up in any areas there? Yesterday, the Prime Minister spoke about some people having symptoms of COVID-19 4 weeks after coming into the country. So should we be maybe extending the period of time we're quarantining people for, or is there any work that you're looking at in this area?
So 2 comments there. We will stick with the 14 days quarantine period, and that's effectively the gold standard globally. It's used throughout the world. And related to that is these people who are testing positive some weeks after they've had symptoms and probably when they were infected. And in a number of those people, they've had negative tests previously. What seems to be clear from studies done in Singapore and South Korea is that whilst they still test positive because they have residual virus or viral fragments, they don't appear to be infectious, and that's the important thing. The second comment is the area we are particularly looking at is international airline crew, and making sure that we are really tight around that, and partly that is to make sure we are in close alignment with Australia so that we can look at that possibility of the trans-Tasman bubble. There was a question over here.
I appreciate it's some way into the future, but have you thought about the rollout of the potential vaccine? Would it mirror the flu vaccine rollouts that we see in New Zealand with sort of elderly and healthcare workers first?
We're starting to think about that. The obvious goal here would be to vaccinate as many people as possible in the country, and as quickly as possible. So we would, this would be a bespoke effort. We wouldn't just use the usual channels we use for vaccinating, and we will stand up a strategy, and I would imagine we will train a particular workforce. Perhaps an analogy is a bit like the election, where a workforce, or the census, where a specific workforce is brought together and trained so that it can be done in a very short space of time. So we're already starting to think about that.
Having a bit of technical issues with the official app, people are still having them. People are saying, that when an invalid code comes up, the QR codes every time they try to use it. Is there work being done to fix this, or is there concerns about it not working?
So every report we get where people are finding a problem, we look into whether it relates to problems they've got with loading the app, registering, or in use of the app, and if there's a problem with the QR code, we will look into those. And there are various channels for providing feedback, and I know people are using them because I've seen some of the feedback, including emails directly to me, and they are all looked at. So we will fix any bugs in the system. I think if people can persevere, and just again to reiterate, even by registering, people are giving us their, and only the Ministry of Health, their updated details, which is very helpful in terms of rapidly being able to contact them should we need to.
Heading into winter, are you concerned about a potential rise in COVID cases, and at what point do we stop testing every sniffle?
So I'm not concerned about a rise in COVID cases if we can maintain a really strong border barrier. It seems very clear that we have broken the chain of transmission in the community here, although we are continuing to test people with symptoms. And we have, on the 22nd of May, we updated our case definition, and it's still very much focused on testing people with a wide range of respiratory symptoms, and in particular because the prevalence of those at the moment is very low because we've sort of broken the chain of transmission of all of those infections. We will keep reviewing that definition as we go into winter, but the analogy I've heard made here is it is like it's like trying to find a needle in a haystack, and you want to find every needle. So we will keep doing that. It's going to be a critical part of our being able to stay on top of this.
It's been about 3 months. We're washing our hands more, we're practicing social distancing. What's the expectation of this flu season? Have we all had these jabs that we might not have needed because we're being so much more cautious about germs at the moment?
Oh, look, I'd still encourage people to have a flu jab, and we've got plenty more. We just got some extra in of Northern Hemisphere vaccine. Look, I don't think we can be too, we can't overdo this. Yes, by all the physical distancing and other hygiene measures, people will be protecting themselves not just from respiratory infections, but from a range of infections, including gastroenteritis and so on. So that's a good thing. And the flu jab will also assist in helping both prevent the transmission of flu in our communities, but also protect individuals who have had a jab.
It's been about 3 months now since we had our first COVID-19 case. I admit it feels like much longer. Looking back, what do you think were some of the biggest challenges, but I guess what are you most proud of as well?
Well, the biggest challenge was the classic challenge of these situations, which is incomplete information. And it's hard to recall now just how little we knew in those early days, and how much we had to base decisions on not just advice we were getting from our science advisors and our public health professionals, but also a very small number of studies that were initially just coming out of Wuhan, And also, we were very fortunate to have, we've got fantastic diplomatic staff who around the world were sending reports back on a daily basis about what was happening in other countries. So the biggest challenge was the lack of information, and of course we know so much more now than we did then, even if you take one area, for example, around pre-symptomatic or asymptomatic transmission. So that was the big challenge. What am I most proud of? The thing I'm most proud of, actually, and that stunned me, is the extent to which all New Zealanders did what was asked of them in Alert Level 4, and our success now, the fact that we had just 2 weeks in Alert Level 3, we're less than 2 weeks into Alert Level 2, and already people are impatient to get to Alert Level 1, is phenomenal, and actually that was because of the extent to which New Zealanders trusted the decisions that had been taken, and then put their shoulders to the wheel behind it, and so we're now able to reap the benefits of that.
On the border, the government has the ability to waive the requirement that someone be a New Zealand citizen in order to come in. They'll still have to go through managed isolation, as with the German pipe experts who came to fix Wellington's system. Is that something? Are those decisions something that the Ministry of Health provides health advice on for each of them?
Yes, we do. We play a role in, and in fact, I sign off on every one of those decisions. And very, very small number of people have been approved. I think there's that example, and maybe one or two people into the health sector for very specific operations that cannot be done otherwise on New Zealand. Actually, no, there's someone who is coming to do checks on and make sure the X-ray equipment is working in about 8 of our district health boards, so that's an exception there, but at the moment, very small numbers of those. Perhaps the last couple of questions.
On the rheumatic fever, we've seen a bit of a spike recently in cases. What do you put that down to, and how concerning is that for you?
Well, this is very interesting because it's actually only in a couple of regions of the country, here in the Greater Wellington region, Hutt and Wellington, and then also in the Bay of Plenty and Lakes district, where they've seen an increase from, in this period, a period where they might have seen between 2 and 4 cases, they've seen 8 or 9. But if you compare, say, with Auckland, which generally has our highest number of any region, they've got an identical number of cases to what they had in the same period last year. So what's interesting is why this has only happened in 1 or 2 regions. It suggests that it may well just be because of random fluctuations which you can get when you've got low numbers. Another thing that's interesting here is we've seen a big drop in meningococcal infections over the same period, and probably again due to the unique circumstances of the lockdown where there was not transmission of these sorts of infections between people.
Yes. Sorry, on the weak positives that some of the tests have returned, could it be that they are antibodies which are coming up in those tests? Had the virus, very weak strains, dead virus still in person?
So the test we're using, the PCR test, is not an antibody test. It won't find antibodies. So the test for antibodies is a blood test, and you then find the antibodies in someone's serum. The weak positive tests just probably mean that the sample has only got a small amount of the virus. I haven't had one of these swabs, but I know it's unpleasant, and part of that is it has to almost be a little bit painful because they have to actually take some cells from the back of the nasopharynx because the virus is inside the cells. So generally a weak positive means they've got perhaps a very small sample or not quite a good enough sample, and those will then be followed up with another test just to confirm what the result is.
Doctors have been telling One News that because of the COVID-19 response, they worry that the rheumatic fever issue has kind of slipped under the radar. What do you say to that?
It hasn't slipped under the radar. In fact, we've been sort of had the radar on about rheumatic fever for probably at least 6 to 8 weeks now, and been working with primary care to make sure that, because what we were worried about was people coming in with a sore throat, especially children, into a CBAC and being swabbed for COVID-19, but not having the right swab and assessment in case it was a strep throat, which is what then leads to rheumatic fever. So I think there has been a high level of awareness again, and still, and again, those increases have only been seen in a couple of regions, so not across the country. But we just encourage you all, anyone with a sore throat, particularly a child, they do need to be clinically assessed. And if they are seen at a CBAC, and they require referral, they will then be referred for both further assessment and treatment at a GP. Last question?
Consider putting the strep or rheumatic fever swab
It's an option, but there needs to be a clinical assessment too. And actually, these swabs can be done also at a pharmacist. We've previously had in some areas of the country pharmacists doing the swabs. And in some places, rather than even swabbing, you can just treat, I'll call empirically, by giving a child the antibiotics, even just on the basis of the clinical history. And that will continue. Certainly, rheumatic fever is something we want to keep right on top of. Okay, thank you very much, and hopefully we'll see you again tomorrow.
Wider potatoes industry, and this is the important bit, is that half the potatoes we grow go into making chips. The other half go into table and also into crisps. If we lose our potato crops for processing, it shrinks the whole industry by about half. Now, what that does is then reduce our scale of economy for us to provide good quality, cheap, plentiful potatoes for the local consumers. It becomes a food security issue. At the moment, we're a net exporter of potatoes. We have scale. We're the 9th largest exporter of potato products in the world.
Wow, I can't slow that down.
So this starts to destabilise our industry.
Unrelated, but I heard last night that New Zealand exports 40% of carrot seeds to the world. Have you heard that one?
Yeah, and that's another example
as a root vegetable enthusiast.
Yeah, root vegetable enthusiast.
Well, potato's a tuber, isn't it?
Yeah,
okay.
Correct. But so for us, this is almost an existential crisis of our industry. We're not, and let me repeat, we're not asking for a handout. We're just asking for a level playing field so that we can operate, that we can employ people, and that our industry can recover and rebuild from the lockdown, and that we can move forward to help the economy of New Zealand grow and prosper.
How do you tell if the chips you're buying are made in New Zealand or overseas?
Always ask, are my chips local? That's the best question to ask. And there are some wonderful processors of chips here in New Zealand. So always ask, are these made, are these local? Were they grown locally?
And who would you ask? I'm trying to think if the person working in the supermarket wouldn't know, would they? You'd have to look on the packet. Or you're talking about, are you talking about actually in cafes and things?
Absolutely. Always ask. Always ask. Ask if you always serve potatoes or fries, ask who the grower is. A lot
you wouldn't
of
know, would you?
Really care.
Yeah.
Well, a lot of restaurants care about this, and they'll actually tell you who they got them from.
Someone says they used to live next to the Macquarie Fries factory. They reckon it was the best smelling house they'd ever lived in. Smelled like hot chips all the time.
That would be wonderful. Smelling hot chips while listening to St Andrews.
Okay. And I'm going to put a hard question to you because it's just come in by text, my favourite sort of hard question, because then I can sort of, distance myself. In some ways, the New Zealand potato industry has reaped what they have sown, pun not intended, over the decades, encouraging an uncritical acceptance of an all-purpose potato, leavened slightly by fashionable Agria or Jersey bennies. Otherwise, consumers are undiscerning and feel that cheaper is better. I sort of followed the point there. Would you like to address that?
Yeah, I'm not exactly in agreement with that listener's comment. We'd point to the success of the Golden Gourmets, the Maribel cultivar, which has been hugely successful. So
what about Nadine though? Nadine's good for no one, is it?
Yeah,
trying to please everyone.
Wait a minute, because Nadine's, and I know Nadine's get a bad name for it, but Nadine's, when they're fresh, are unbelievably tasty little potato, and they do meet a part of the market likes them. I personally like them freshly dug. Once they get a bit of age on them, they're a little bit tasteless, but early on, they're really nice eating potato. And
a potato is not like a bottle of wine. Doesn't improve.
No, it's not. No, they're not. They'll store reasonably well for a period of time.
But don't try cellaring them.
No, don't try cellaring them for years. They don't improve with age. A few months are okay in a cool, dark place, but longer than that, no, we wouldn't recommend that, Jesse.
Now, I used to work for a chip company in the UK, and I remember touring the factory there, and the guy telling me that potato chips, crisps, are actually darker at certain times of year because of the natural sugars in the potato. Any truth to that? If people find a dark chip in their packet of crisps today, does that tell them anything about when the potato was cooked?
Yeah, no, what can happen is that they get sugar-induced storage. So what happens is the sugar levels in the potato change during storage, and sometimes it can be, the sugar levels can be slightly too elevated, and you get a darkening or a browning of the chip. Usually they have optical sorters that sort out the really dark crisps. I must confess I quite like the taste of them. And they usually optically sort them out. I must confess my best ever event was to stand at the end of a crisping line and eat the rejects.
Yeah, straight out of the oil are pretty good.
Oh, that was pretty awesome. If you've ever experienced that, that's as close to nirvana as you could possibly get in this industry.
Did you swat up on Potato Facts for the interview as Potatoes NZ CEO? Did you know a lot about potatoes going in, or was it a quick sort of learning curve?
So I did study horticulture and botany while I was at university, but I'm also gluten intolerant, so I don't know if that affected my selection, but I'm a natural lover of potatoes. I can literally eat them for breakfast, for lunch and for dinner. I don't eat a lot of pastas unless it's gluten free, so I can happily.
Natural job for you.
Potatoes. Yeah, it was a natural fit. And look, everyone loves potatoes. I on occasion find someone who doesn't like potatoes, and we offer them counselling to get them through.
Because I have an inexhaustible list of questions here I want to ask you, maybe we should get you back for the expert slot, the Monday expert slot, and we could just ask, because I feel quite guilty now going off topic, but I've got so many random potato questions. Can you have a chat to one of our producers about doing that? Would that be possible?
Oh, I'd love to talk about potatoes. It's my favourite.
Yeah.
I get paid for it, but I also enjoy doing it.
Would you be surprised to hear that? Would you be surprised to hear that one of our listeners bought some frozen hash browns recently, and we're
Kia ora koutou and good afternoon, everyone. This week marks the 2-year anniversary of our government's decision to eradicate Mycoplasma bovis. I'm joined by Minister O'Connor, who will speak to our success so far in getting M. bovis under control. Our beef and dairy sectors are the backbone of our economy. COVID has demonstrated that once again. While the rest of the country was in lockdown, agricultural production continued, earning us much needed export receipts. And just like with COVID, going hard and early to beat M. bovis has paid dividends for us. In both cases, the economic benefits of our strong biosecurity and health responses are obvious and have only enhanced our international brand as a producer of high-quality, safe food. Our economic success lies in our value add, and it lies in our reputation. And in a post-COVID world, safe food will be increasingly sought out. Once again, our health response can enhance our economic success. I do want to hand over to Minister O'Connor, but in doing so, I do want to note that our success with M. bovis at this point in the journey does place us amongst the world's first to have ever attempted to eradicate M. bovis. And while there's a journey left to travel, I'm very proud of the work that's being done by MPI, the industry, farmers, but also the Minister. So, Minister O'Connor.
Kia ora. Thank you, Prime Minister. Thursday marks the 2-year anniversary of this government's decision to attempt what no other country in the world has, that is to eradicate cattle disease Mycoplasma bovis. 2 years on, and the technical data is showing that we are on track. The key measure of success, the estimated dissemination rate, or EDR, shows strongly that we have M. bovis firmly in our sights. The same as with COVID. If the rate is greater than 1, then the disease is growing. If it's below 1, we're shrinking the disease. The EDR for M. bovis is now at 0.4, which is down from over 2 at the start of the outbreak. So we're looking harder and finding fewer infected animals. We currently have 17 active properties, and 232 that have been cleared of the disease and are back up and operating. The decision to pursue an eradication strategy was made jointly with our industry partners, New Zealand Beef and Lamb and Dairy NZ. Had we left this disease to run rampant, I'm not sure that our dairy and beef sectors would have been able to weather the economic storm of COVID-19 and the challenges of drought conditions as well as they have. Beef and dairy export prices have held up. In fact, there was record demand for our meat. In March, total red meat monthly exports topped $1 billion for the first time. This shows that the sectors are well placed to lead us out of this economic crisis. As we have with our response to COVID-19, this government showed leadership, made the tough decision, and we've managed this eradication effort with discipline and with focus. There's no question M. bovis has a huge impact on the sector, and particularly on those affected families and farmers. Although there is still a long way to go, our farming community should be really proud of themselves. I'm certainly very proud of them and their commitment to eradicate M. bovis. Thank you, Prime Minister.
Right, thank you. Open to questions.
What do you say to the farmers who feel like the government's put too much of an emphasis on M. bovis in terms of the money that you've spent and the time taken, and not enough on the drought, and something they're feeling the pinch of right now?
Look, M. bovis is a long program. We can't take our foot off the pedal. If we were to do that, then the disease might run out and it cost us more. So I think most of them understand we need to continue to focus on the eradication of M. bovis, and over a 10-year period, we think we'll get there.
Could we be putting a foot more on the pedal then when it comes to support farmers who are suffering because of the drought?
Look, we've used advice from federated farmers from the Rural Support Trusts on the ground as to how we should best support farmers. Some of it's direct, some of it's with advice. We still take that advice before coming up with schemes of our own.
As you move to eradicate M. bovis, there were some criticisms directed at the farming community regarding the low uptake of NATE, the usage of those sort of systems. Are you seeing evidence that more farmers are using that system?
Look, when we came into government, NATE was effectively dysfunctional. We've upgraded that system. We've ensured that farmers know the importance of it. And now we have a high level of compliance. There have been warning letters. There have been prosecutions. I believe that farmers now understand its value and, for the most part, are adhering to, the law.
How many cattle have been culled as part of the eradication process?
It's over 150,000, but that's about 1% of the total number that we would normally kill in the processing over a 2-year period.
Minister, did your experiences with trying to eradicate M. bovis influence how you chose to approach COVID in any way, and if so, how?
Yeah, I mean, I do recall that at the time we were making the really weighty decision around eradication for M. bovis, one of the things that was raised with us was that it just hadn't been done before. But working alongside experts in the field and our farming community, we jointly made a decision that it was worth us putting in that effort to try and get New Zealand M. bovis free. Our primary sector is so valuable to us that was an effort I absolutely stand by. The learnings from it, listen to the science and the evidence, but don't be afraid to have some faith in your ability to do something that might not have been done elsewhere.
Do you have an update on the enforcement action that has been taken against farmers in terms of those numbers around NATE?
Look, I don't have them, but hundreds of letters, warning letters have been sent out. There have been some fines imposed. Prior to that coming in, I think there'd only been 5 warning letters sent out to farmers. So a huge lift in both the enforcement, oversight and advice going to farmers.
On uptake, is there any way of measuring uptake? Do we have data on that? Or?
No, I haven't seen the latest figure. I think it was something like about 60% uptake now. So there's still some farmers who are not technically adhering to all the parts of it, but all of them understand that they have to buy into this pretty quickly.
So non-compliance is still quite high. Are you sure that we can actually say that we have eradicated this, but we don't know how stock are moving around the country?
Well, no. With most of the stock being moved, that is being enforced. I guess the issue on farmers with tags that might fall out, and so we're working with farmers, making sure the system both of tagging, of recording with technology, is updated, so it's a bit more user friendly, and actually farmers can plug that information into the system a bit more effectively.
Are you confident then on moving day that all of those herds moving around, that they will be traced and tracked properly?
Absolutely. What I can say is that where we have movement of animals around the country, we are scrutinising that very, very carefully.
What are the reasons for the vaccines?
Did you have a...
what are the reasons for the non-compliance that you've seen coming through?
Some of it's just simply on-farm practice. Some of the tags fall out. We've got to make sure the design is right. We've got to make sure that farmers can plug the data into the system. We've got issues with rural broadband for some of them. So it's technical non-compliance more than it is farmers ignoring the system. And so we've got to work with them to make sure that it does operate more effectively. But when it comes to the shifting of animals around the country, we're right onto that and ensuring that none of that would contribute in any way to the spread of M. bovis.
Who pays for NAIT? Do farmers pay to access the system, or does the government subsidise it in some way?
Farmers pay to access. They buy the tags, and it's a joint venture between the industry bodies and government to ensure that NAIT runs properly. And so we've updated the legislation, and we've put more money in to make sure that the system works.
On vaccines, what's the plan if no successful vaccine is developed?
Well, I think there's a couple of things to keep in mind that will be critical for economies and countries like New Zealand being able to lift some of the restrictions. One is a vaccine, the other is successful treatment. So there's perhaps been less coverage around that, but that is still a very important part of the response to COVID. And also testing that can be done quickly and that we can have security knowing that it's giving accurate results. So it's not just about a vaccine going forward.
On the vaccine, what would the development of a vaccine against COVID mean for New Zealand?
Look, the vaccine would be a game changer for the world. What's important is that New Zealand has a stake in its development, its manufacturing and its distribution. We've developed a strategy, including investment in some of the global efforts into research and development, including domestically, and gearing up our manufacturing capability for the eventuality where a vaccine may be then provided to be able to be manufactured elsewhere. So New Zealand is positioning itself well for the future of vaccine development.
Can we see a situation where New Zealand would be able to open up the borders a bit using rapid tests to test people before they get on a plane and after they get off the plane?
I do believe that's a possibility. I mean, there is at the moment testing of or some work being done around 20-minute testing, but it is in the early stages. The success rate is, or the accuracy rate is not high. And certainly one of the issues that you will have seen even through our reporting is that even with the more accurate testing we've had, which takes more like a 24-hour period, you still do get false negatives. And so that is one of the hurdles to be overcome, but there's obviously a lot of R&D going into that.
What would your response be to calls for a Royal Commission to be called into how the government's handled the COVID crisis?
We've always obviously been open to accountability. In fact, all the way through where Parliament hasn't been able to function as it usually would, we've created mechanisms to make sure we are held to account. What I am mindful of is that we are still in the middle of the response, and I do think we want to get ourselves in a position where can look back with a bit of hindsight, and at the moment it's very early days.
We're facing Todd Muller down for the first question time with him in a few minutes. His question to you is much more detailed than usual leader of the opposition questions. It's not do you stand by your statements, it's a specific forecasting thing. Are you looking forward to that showdown, and what do you make of that more kind of specific type of questioning?
I'm not sure I would characterise it in that way. Look, question time is an important part of our democracy. It's an important part of our accountability systems here in Parliament. Obviously, this is one day of many when it comes to questions, and one event of many when it comes to our work as a government on COVID. So it's an hour of a very busy day.
So it seems that there are a number of people connected to the
forgotten the name of that movie. Sorry, the sequel with the blue people.
Avatar.
Thank you, Avatar. In the
Sequel with the blue people. I thought I was going Smurfs, but okay.
A number of executives in New Zealand quarantining to prepare filming for Avatar 2. So they've been given exemptions, I'm guessing, to come into the country. Do you know how many people, foreigners, have been granted exemptions to do this type of work?
Yeah, so the areas where we've had requests for exemptions, and that would need to go to the Minister of Economic Development, have been areas like maintenance of critical infrastructure where there's specialty knowledge required. Keeping in mind these are individuals that have to then commit to quarantine before coming in. And so primarily we've had some, I think, from my recollection, the aviation industry as well. And of course, then you're referring to some in the film industry. So it's been a range of different industries. The number of applications has been small, and therefore the number has been relatively small as well. But I don't want to set you wrong with the exact figures. I did speak to Minister Twyford about the exemptions regime over the weekend. We are just going to make sure that Cabinet checks in again, because there are some individuals who are in some really sticky situations. They have perhaps family members or loved one here, lives here, and haven't fitted into the category of returning. I do want to make sure that we address that issue before we see an opening up of the exemptions regime, because I do think that will raise inequity and issues of fairness.
Those issues though, because there are people who have homes in New Zealand, they got caught outside of the country through no fault of their own.
Yeah.
And they're stuck in places around the world that they can't get in. They've been trying, hitting their heads against the wall.
This is the exact issue I've just acknowledged. That is where I wouldn't want to see us getting too far ahead in an exemptions regime where actually there's legitimate requests being made, but we still haven't dealt with the ongoing issue of those individuals who haven't been citizens or permanent residents but have been caught outside of the country but actually have their lives here. So we do need to work through that issue.
Has damage been done in that case?
Oh, look, I would absolutely acknowledge that there are a number of people who for various reasons either have been able to come home in terms of our border controls but haven't been able to find flights, who have had loss that they haven't been able to come back for, to grieve for family members. There's been a lot of hurt through COVID-19, and we are doing our best in the environment we're in now to try and address some of those issues where we can.
Ian Lees-Galloway yesterday said that it could actually be some time before those people could come back to New Zealand, and the government needed to make a decision on whether they instead prioritised Kiwis for the limited number of jobs that there will be.
You might be talking about people with the legal right to, so there's a few different categories. There's those who are already living here, have family here, have housing here. And then there are those who might already have been issued with a legal right to come to New Zealand to work but haven't entered into the country yet. In those cases, you'd understand why. We always want to make sure that people who have work visas actually have work, and we are in a very different situation now than we were several months ago. So there's a couple of different categories that need to be worked through.
You had a conversation with Scott Morrison recently, or any kind of catch up or update on the Trans-Tasman bubble?
I spoke to him this morning, but again, we stay in regular contact, as I've said many times before, because we are working closely together and also facing similar issues. Look, in that most recent conversation, just reaffirming again our commitment to working on that Trans-Tasman bubble, we spoke about the fact that our officials are talking with one another, and we're continuing on in earnest with preparations.
Is it actually progressing? Is there any kind of timeline?
We've always been working towards the goal. We are both at a phase of reopening up, of easing restrictions, and so there is a degree to which we want to see that play out a little bit for us both to be assured that we have the virus well under control, and in the meantime, we're working on getting our borders ready.
Is it a matter of months as opposed to weeks until the Trans-Tasman bubble will be established?
I've been cautious about putting timelines on it, because even if you'd asked me a month ago, would we be here now making the progress that New Zealand has made, I might have been a bit more hesitant. So I have been cautious about putting timelines down, but it is fair to say that we are both working in earnest, and we're both very keen to make it happen as soon as we safely can.
Tangible further developments that came out of that phone call?
Oh, just merely the fact that we were acknowledging that our officials were already talking to each other, and we just talked about some of the detail they're working through. Yeah. Make this the last question.
What the situation is with the labour market tests and jobs in the light of the Immigration Minister's comments. Is it that people on temporary work visas in the country their job will eventually have to undergo a labour market test? People who were stuck outside the border, will their jobs have to undergo a labour market test before they're allowed back in.
And so, as I've just indicated, that there are a series of decisions that are still being worked through there, but there are a particular group who are, I would say, a smaller number who are particularly distressed by their separation from their home, and that's where we really want to prioritise working through that. Then there are others, like those who, for instance, have the legal right to study in New Zealand but have never come into New Zealand to take up study. And so there's a number of issues to work through there in terms of their study rights, but also quarantine and the border restrictions. So a number of decisions that still need to be made. Okay, thank you everyone.